Hello, Madison High School students, and welcome back to week 6. Last week we were talking and debating about Black art, and so now we're going to kind of go back to some of the more commonplace movements of this 20th century, and they all kind of run together a little bit, and so they all are overlapping. And that's one of the really cool things about American literature, is that they do start to change and kind of not only build upon one another, but a lot of people are like within different scopes of this time frame. So we have a lot of different things going on. So a couple of quick reminders. This week is going to be your very first draft of your muckraking editorial, which I'm very excited to see. And so as you're drafting, really keep in mind some of the things that we were talking about in regards to like how the editorial is supposed to sensationalize and like call to action. And so as you're drafting, like really pay attention to some of the things that we've been talking about in regards to like exposing, right? Exposing things that were going on in society. And so in order to do that, we're also going to be focusing on the disillusionment of society. Woohoo! So this week, we're focusing mostly on modernism and imagism. And so these are predominantly white folks. So last week we had a lot of our Black and other authors of color. And so these are more of our white groups here. So you'll see that we only have a forum post and then a writing workshop for modernism, because your first draft of your muckraking essay is going to be due this week. So this is an editorial paper, and so it gives you the guidelines there, and I will also post this on here again, just so that you can see the whole thing. But remember that you're going to have 4 to 6 sources, and it's going to be about 1,200 words in total. And you are going to be peer editing it next week. So what we're going to be focusing on here is audience awareness, appropriate voice, effective argumentation. But keep in mind some of those tenets of an editorial. So let me go back so that I can bring this up so that you can see it before we start talking about modernism today. Okay. And again, I will put this on the document so that you don't have to go back through and try to find this all the time. Okay, so you will see. All right, and so the muckraking editorial. Okay, so just as a reminder of some muckraking strategies from what we went over last time, you're looking for a bold, attention-grabbing headline. These are some examples, right? So hidden horrors of fast fashion, how sweatshops still thrive. Clear, hard-hitting thesis, vivid and descriptive language. You're going to have strong use of evidence and data, first person or immersive narrative. You don't have to do this, but it is effective, like Upton Sinclair. Urgent and emotive tone, and then a call to action if appropriate. So these are the requirements, but what I want to show you is here's your rubric. So I'm going to be scoring you specifically on having a clear headline and that thesis, descriptive language, strong evidence and data, urgent and emotive tone, logical and organizational structure. So a lot of these are going to be pretty standard to like a regular, big essay or research paper, but I want you to really pay attention to the like different tenets of editorials, right? So I have this whole section down here on editorial writing, and how they are a little bit different, and how when you're muckraking, you're specifically trying to unearth things, right? You're trying to expose an injustice or call something to action. So think about it more so as something that is an issue that needs to be dealt with. And so there are some additional sample structures down here to help guide you. And then some other topics here as well. So I've really liked looking at what you guys have been doing for your topics. And so if you have any more thoughts, or if you really need like more assistance honing it down, just let me know. I'm happy to assist. All right, so let's go back to where we were. All right. So on this page, I'm going to click on the Modernism slides. So this week we're going to be looking at modernism. Here are the readings. If you end up having different page numbers, most of them should be still called the same thing, so you just have to find them on the appropriate page, but these are the page numbers that are associated with the 10th edition. So, all right. So as you are working this week on your editorial, some things that are also going on in the world with modernism is that during that time period that we are just coming out of, we are now facing the historical context of the disillusionment of World War One. And so in that disillusionment, there was a lot of like a breakdown in what people considered to be, social propriety. It was like the broken American spirit. And there was a loss of innocence and a destruction of the American dream that really came out of World War One differently than that revitalized hope that we talked about in regards to the Reconstruction and the Black voices of Reconstruction. And so there's a strong shift with documenting like realistic life here, which was unusual. And so you have technological innovations coming off of Reconstruction. The 20th century just boomed, right? So light and electricity. There's a symbol from knowledge and awareness. There's relativity in physics, integration of internal combustion engine, and then the creation of cars, rise of social programs like welfare, compulsory school labor laws, et cetera. And a lot of this is coming out of what we talk about with muckraking. Then you also have psychologists that are coming out, Freud, Jung, like the proponents of our modern psychology. And so technology just became this ubiquitous thing all of a sudden. So we have cars, radios, cameras, typewriters, and phones, and everybody is like really disconnected but connected at the same time. And so it's kind of like started this information superhighway that we then, of course, noted as the internet later. So the modernists, like other isms, focused on music, dance, art, architecture, but there was this movement of avant-garde movements that try to overthrow the status quo. There was like this way of like shirking off Victorianism and like getting rid of the old way. And embracing the future. But the world wars kind of affected humanity with alienation, frustration, disillusionment, and like, why should we care about a world that is just going to destroy us, right? So, some conventions of these modernists that you'll see when you read some of these pieces is that they broke the rules. And so they're very experimental compared to what you see before. And, yeah, we've mentioned that there are some experimental poets and authors before then, but this was like a stark break in all structure. So, we have the rise of stream of consciousness, multiple narratives. We have no more realism in that, like, it has to be just as life is, but when it is, and it jumps around through time and through space and through minds and through the moment. And then there's this intertextual movement adding in classical elements and symbolism coming from psychology. So there's a lot less of a focus on just like a snapshot of like real life and rather a snapshot of like real life with all of the extra components of what the mind has to offer. And so it became much more versatile and much more experimental. So some of the authors you probably have heard of: T.S. Eliot, we're going to read from The Wasteland. John Steinbeck was a very notable modernist. Zora Neale Hurston, who was also part of the Black Writers movement from the Harlem Renaissance. Ernest Hemingway, very famous. William Faulkner, Sound and the Fury. Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, and Claude McKay, who we just talked about last week. And many, 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 many more. So some things that I want you to note. These pieces are fairly short, but they're like little tiny bits of this time period of disillusionment. So you'll see some patterns. So what I want you to pay attention to is there's a fragmented collage of writing. There's an interior monologue that's different. We have multiple perspectives, breaking narrative structures, stream of consciousness writing, which is where your writing comes off as you would talk or as you would think. Legacy of experimental forms, and then those modernist techniques still stay now with more experimental or more postmodernist structures. Um, then we have a fragmented narrative, and you'll see that come out. So, one of the most famous pieces from this time period is, of course, The Great Gatsby. You're just going to spend just a couple pages looking at it, but there are some different symbolic elements that come out, like the green light, the Valley of Ashes, the eyes, and the power of the eyes. But we have these unreliable narrators, and the decay of the American dream, and the destruction of materialism, the Jazz Age, and how it focuses on a moral decline in America, and time and memory as fragmented. You'll also see The Wasteland, and if you remember from last semester, we read a little bit from T.S. Eliot and the J. Alfred Prufrock. But in The Wasteland, it's a 5-part structure. You're not reading all of it, but of like a spiritual crisis after World War I. Multiple voices, multiple languages, classical and literary allusions, birth, death, rebirth, cultural fragmentation. And so he's one of the most famous literary modernists. Wallace Stevens, he was a corporate man, went to Harvard, but he also made revolutionary poetry. He focused on imagination, and he has a really notable piece called 13 Ways to Looking at a Blackbird. And so we're going to be kind of like looking at that in a different way on Wednesday, or not on Wednesday, but like for your writing workshop. And he won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1955. Ernest Hemingway was a gay man. He killed himself, but he was also one of the most brilliant modernist writers. But he was one of those writers that only showed things on the surface level, and he wanted you to infer it, right? So one of his most famous lines is, "Baby shoes never worn," or "for sale, baby shoes never worn." And it's one of the most famous word stories in existence, because there's so much that can be extrapolated from it without any context whatsoever. Marianne Moore, very similar, but she was noticed for her detailed observations, and then she uses a lot of complex syllables. And so she's known for The Fish and Poetry, which we're going to read this week. And the last point that I wanted to bring up is imagism. So imagism is kind of like the most forefront piece of modernist poetry we're going to look at this week, because it's to focus on really clear, sharp language. So Ezra Pound was probably the most famous imagist poet. Also, you'll probably be familiar with a couple of the pieces that I'll show you, but one of them is from William Carlos Williams. But imagism is an offshoot of modernism, but it was a focus on poetry being very, very simple and very, very short and very small and very concise. Like everything is very concise in its language use. There's this avoidance of cliche and sentimentality here. Juxtaposition, like images being put next to each other without any sort of connection being, but you have to derive the connection. And Ezra Pound notably focused on his influences from Eastern literature, specifically haikus, Japanese and Chinese literature. And you also have Amy Lowell and H.D., who are very well known for this time period. So before I let you go today, because I know that there will be probably a lot of questions as you're developing your editorial this week, but these are just some examples of imagist pieces from the modernist era. So one of my favorites is The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. So a lot of people, when they first see this, the first thing that they are inclined to think is, what? Like, why is that a poem? It's so simple, right? And it is and it isn't, right? So you can kind of take it and you can see that it's very simple, but you can extrapolate meaning, right? Why does so much depend upon it? Where is this real red wheelbarrow? Like, if you think about a red wheelbarrow, where does that take place? Well, it's in an agricultural setting, right? So if it's in an agricultural like place, there's like this wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater, there's white chickens, right? So this wheelbarrow is like this one red image among like this glazed rainwater and this like strong imagery. It's like, okay, so maybe it has something to do with agriculturalism. how America was founded on an agricultural society, and like this kind of broken down state of like how our agricultural system has declined. Now, you may not interpret it that way, and that's okay. But there are a lot of people that have read into these things a lot, right? This is Just to Say is a very famous poem. There's a great Facebook group that just is called Plum Posting, and it just makes fun of this poem all the time. It's great, so you should check it out. Um, but I have eaten the plums that were in the ice box and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. um, and it's just this ultimate simplicity of like the messaging, right? So it can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be. Um, and more Images poets. This is Carl Sandburg. So if you've ever been to the Carl Sandburg home, he wrote this. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. So there's a control of the images here, as well as a control over what is being seen and what is below the surface. So like kind of like the iceberg theory that came out of this time period in psychology. Okay. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back here. So the tasks for this week, the big one is you're going to have your very first draft of your muckraking piece. The modernist post, just as a reminder, since I had to send out some emails last week, like, please, whatever you do, I know that some of these might be a little bit tricky, but what you do need to make sure that you do in these is that you have read and thought about them before you start answering them. If you copy this whole list and put it in a chat GPT, I will know. So make sure that you are only using it as a tool and that the tool is working for you, not taking away the intellectual curiosity of being in a college class. Okay. On that note, I'm looking forward to seeing what you all come up with your editorial. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.